The date is March 18th, 2010. Robert Gray Powell, one of Apple's software engineers, was out for his 27th birthday in Redwood City, California with his uncle. They decided on a local favorite German bar, Gourmet House Stout. "I underestimated how good German beer is," Gray posted to his Facebook page. From the next-gen iPhone prototype, he was in charge of testing. After all, this was only Apple's fourth entry into the iPhone lineup. It was still necessary to test these devices in the field, in actual real-world situations, and Gray wasn't just any software engineer. He was part of the team working on the iPhone's baseband software, what enables iPhones to make calls. This was his responsibility. Apple's next-generation prototype was even cleverly disguised inside of a chunky case in an attempt to help it blend in a bit more, and more so resemble an iPhone 3GS, at the time the most current publicly available model. Gray Powell's Facebook post would be the last time he interacted with that prototype iPhone before setting it down on a bar stool and leaving to go home. A mistake that would soon send ripples through the entire tech world. See, this is a story a lot of people think they know, and we did too. But the truth is much deeper and darker than any of us realized. This is the story of the iPhone 4 and so much more.
This is a story that's amazing. It's got theft, it's got buying stolen property, it's got extortion. I'm sure there's sex in there somewhere, you know?
Really?
And so somebody should make a movie out of this.
Breaking news that an Apple iPhone 4 was found in a bar in Redwood City, California.
Apple is well known for fiercely guarding technology, but it seems that an Apple employee accidentally left a prototype of the new iPhone at a bar in California last month, and now it's all over the web.
Some people wondering if Apple actually planted it.
Apple CEO Steve Jobs says he's very troubled by a string of suicides at Foxconn.
The Chinese factory that assembles iPhones for Apple says it's put nets on buildings to stop people from jumping.
Hello? Hi, it's Steve Jobs, and I want my phone back.
We can only continue to make content like this free to watch thanks to sponsors like NordPass. Please take a second to hear about them, and the rest of your experience will be uninterrupted. NordPass is an effortless, reliable, and most importantly, secure password manager for you, your family, even your business. With NordPass, the days of writing down your sensitive passwords are gone. Even sharing these passwords with family members and work colleagues has never been easier or more secure. NordPass is proactive with their protection with a built-in data breach scanner, allowing you to check if your data's been leaked and stay ahead of hackers with bad intentions. NordPass is taking a chance on content like this, so let's take a chance on them. Head to nordpass.com/FPT and use code FPT at checkout to get a free 3-month trial or 20% off. And now, enjoy the show. The prototype iPhone ended up in the hands of Brian Hogan, a 21-year-old student at the time. Gray Powell had already left, but thanks to Facebook being one of the few apps on the device and there being no passcode set up, Hogan was able to deduce that this was indeed Gray Powell's iPhone, an actual Apple employee's iPhone. Wheels were already turning in Hogan's head that this was more than an ordinary iPhone. And those suspicions were well-founded, because when Hogan woke up the next morning, he plugged it into his roommate Catherine Martinson's computer.
If I remember correctly, the next day, Apple remotely disables the device. And so this is an indication to him oh no, I've actually got something.
In a phone interview with Gizmodo's Jesus Diaz, Hogan said, "I thought it was just an iPhone 3GS. It just looked like one. I tried the camera, but it crashed 3 times. As he investigated the disabled device further, he found 2 barcodes placed on the back, and another placed next to the volume buttons, strings of numbers and letters that help Apple internally identify prototypes, a practice that is common even to this day. That's when Brian Hogan really noticed how strange the iPhone felt. And hey, There's a camera on the front that's never been on an iPhone before. Naturally, it didn't take long for him to take off the disguised case, revealing the actual device underneath. Apple's next iPhone. Years later, in an Ask Me Anything on Reddit, Brian Hogan corroborated details from his interview with Jesus Diaz. According to Brian, he called, quote, a lot of Apple numbers and tried to find someone who was at least willing to transfer his call to the right person, but no luck. No one took him seriously, and all he got for his troubles was a ticket number. He went on to say the call to Apple was an effort to give them the phone back. The person on the other line didn't know there was a prototype missing. I rushed through that part of the story, but Apple was the first phone call. In the coming weeks, Brian, with help from his friend Sage Wallower, began reaching out to various media outlets in an attempt to sell the prototype. They were asking for $10,000 US. He actually names Engadget as one of the outlets they contacted, but didn't like that they, quote, seemed shady. Eventually, Hogan made his way to Gizmodo, with the prototype iPhone landing in the hands of then editor Jason Chen. Not for $10,000, but for $5,000. And it would not take long for Jason Chen and Gizmodo to figure out their next moves.
This was not a common practice, especially when you talk about journalistic integrity. Typically, a news outlet will not buy something in order to report about it. Before, you had to have multiple sources to verify information. This was like, we don't need a source, we're gonna buy this thing.
On April 19th, 2010, Jason Chen publishes what would become Gizmodo's most viewed piece of content of all time, titled, This is Apple's next iPhone, and it is an embarrassingly thorough teardown of the prototype. The disguise is fully lifted, every secret is on display.
I remember checking the Apple forums and initially not believing that it was real because it seemed so crazy.
When this story broke, people were like, nope, that's far too ugly to really be the iPhone. And yet, it very much was, yeah.
Chen breaks the entire device down, not just in the text of the article, but also...
I remember specifically watching my friend Jason Chen holding what seemed to be the upcoming, unannounced, unreleased iPhone.
Hey, I'm Jason Chen. This is the new iPhone.
We've got Dan Ackerman, the senior editor at gadget website CNET.com. Good to see you. What do you make of this story? Some people say it's a gimmick by
It's
Apple to
definitely
get
not
some
a gimmick.
publicity.
I mean, I've been writing about Apple and its products for years. I've never seen anything like this. It's completely unprecedented.
That is the biggest hardware leak story in history.
That was a moment where the rules were completely broken.
The only proof that Gizmodo offers on the day of the story going live, in a section they label as Why We Think It's Definitely Real, is a quote from industry veteran John Gruber from the Daring Fireball. So let's call him.
It annoyed me, and still does in hindsight, the way that Gizmodo tried to play this as, oh, we don't know, you know. If you're going to buy a phone that you know was stolen in a bar, just own it. Don't sit there and pretend like you just happened to come in contact with it from these good-hearted people who found it and didn't know what to do with this phone that they found in a bar, which is ridiculous.
This would be a monumental device for Apple, a device that introduced many of the features and experiences we seem to take for granted today. This would be the first iPhone featuring a front-facing camera for what would be a revolutionary feature of the era, a little something called FaceTime. The rear-facing camera would also receive a flash, another first. The iPhone 4's display would be wildly improved over the 3GS, and as Steve would later tell us, had pixels so small that they would be imperceivable to the naked eye. The iPhone's very first Retina display. That, along with a litany of other changes across the entire device from materials to button changes and more, this is a big deal. This was Apple's golden egg. An iPhone prototype has landed in the hands of journalists, exposed for the entire world to see 2 whole months before Apple ever planned to officially announce it. as the iPhone 4. The reality sets in. This was the iPhone 4. This was Apple's next iPhone, and there was nothing Apple or Steve Jobs could do about it. There's no going back now. That article sends so many pieces of this story into motion. It happens very quickly and all at once. That same day, Jesus Diaz publishes another article to Gizmodo, How Apple Lost the iPhone 4, where the transcript of his call with Brian Hogan is presented alongside a call with Gray Powell and Gizmodo author John Herman.
Hello? Is this Gray? Yeah. Hi, this is John Herman from Gizmodo.com. Hey, you work at Apple, right? I can't really talk too much right now. Oh, I understand. We have a device, and we think that maybe you misplaced it at a bar, and we'd like to give it back. Yeah, I forwarded your email. Someone should be contacting you. Okay.
Gray is described as sounding tired and broken, but still employed at Apple. As you can imagine, the internet basically exploded. Tech products getting leaked happens, and Apple is certainly not immune to that. iPods, MacBooks, even the original iPad had leaked the same year a bit earlier. But this was on a completely different scale. Even now, if you see a leak, it's usually a blurry photo from supply chain, or, if we're lucky, a CAD file. This was it. The actual phone, straight from the source, from the hands of an Apple employee, onto a worldwide stage for all of us to see. In an instant, Gray Powell's name is plastered all over the internet, with many other publications and thousands of readers and commenters echoing the same few sentiments. That putting his name, any information about him out there to the public, was not okay. Gizmodo reasons that including Gray's name is for his protection.
I can see the rationale in that argument of saying, well, look, if we make this guy famous and this story is going to be a big story, everybody's going to know if Apple fires this guy because we said who he is, we said where he works, people are going to be checking in on his LinkedIn, and if he gets canned, that's going to be a huge story.
But it could have also been seen as the opposite, making Gray the scapegoat.
The only time I think you'd ever put a source's name out there like that is to get some of the heat off of you.
Hey, look, it's not just us. It's not like we're this big bad company. This was a mistake at Apple as well.
If they know who left the iPhone and they know that person worked at Apple, now they're adding legitimacy to the story. So they're using Gray's name and likeness as a way to legitimize their own story despite what might happen to Gray in a public forum.
Thousands raised concerns over Gizmodo paying for what was argued as stolen property. And, of course, Gray's name being given so immediately with no attempts to obfuscate or hide him at all, even directly linking Gray's social media. In an interview with CNET, Gray's father, Robert, said that Gray was devastated. And yeah, I could imagine any one of us would feel the same. Even now, Apple is known for their absolute devotion to secrecy. And in 2010, that devotion is perhaps at its highest point. This incident had the entire internet's attention. And now, it had the attention of Steve Jobs himself.
Hello? Hi, it's Steve Jobs, and I really want my phone back.
Steve Jobs has always been known for his passion and intensity when it comes to his company.
Steve was kind of famous at not being great at conflict resolution.
In interviews, when asked about his and Apple's handling of the missing prototype, Steve adopts a casual, almost hands-off approach to the situation.
This whole thing is very colorful, and the DA's investigating it, and to my knowledge, they have somebody from the courts that is making sure that they only see stuff that relates to this case and no other cases. I believe they're taking great pains to do that. And so I don't know where it will end up. It's really up to the DA.
However, and I'm sure this will come to shock none of you, Steve's actions, according to the people involved, were very different.
How mad is Steve Jobs right now?
The brand Apple, it is meticulously built and crafted and controlled. I don't know what Steve Jobs does when he loses control. I don't want to be around him right now.
I've interacted with Steve in a variety of different settings. When he's in a good mood, when he's in a doesn't want to be so talkative mood. I've had him over my shoulder when I gave a presentation to Canon execs, and I felt the heat. He had this intensity around him, right? Even when he was nice, there was an intensity about him. You don't want to unleash the beast, and that's why I said that at the time, like, I didn't use those words, but you do not want to unleash the Steve Jobs beast.
Brian Lamb, a very prolific editor at Gizmodo since 2006, was on a much-needed sabbatical when Jason Chen published the iPhone 4 teardown. Lamb tells us it took only an hour from the story going live to his phone ringing with none other than Apple CEO Steve Jobs on the other end. This was not the first time that Steve Jobs and Brian Lamb were in contact. They had spoken multiple times in the past, mostly revolving around Gizmodo, and that Steve was actually an avid fan, a daily reader. But on this phone call, though, Steve was quick to make demands, as Lamb tells us, in the charming way Steve was known for when he wanted something out of reach.
Steve Jobs, when it came to business, I think many saw as like one of the ultimate chess players out there.
I appreciate you had your fun with our phone, and I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the sales guy who lost it. But we need the phone back because we can't let it fall into the wrong hands.
The pair spent a few moments on the phone, with Steve Jobs making absolutely sure that Brian Lamb fully understood the lengths that he and Apple were willing to go to reclaim their property.
There are two ways we can do this. I can send someone to pick up the phone. I don't have it. But you know someone who does. Or we can send someone with legal papers. And I don't want to do that.
Steve Jobs is an enigma. He was his own guy. He marched to the beat of his own drum, right? A CEO just calling you up and just saying, hey, you have my phone and I would like to have it back. That was an opportunity, in my opinion. That was an opportunity to just, hey, let's just do this and we'll call it a day.
This first phone call actually ended with Jobs asking Lamb what he thought of the device. Brian told him,
"It's beautiful."
Their next phone call, though, was not as polite. Brian Lamb agreed to return the iPhone prototype, but this time, he had a demand of his own. You see, one of the missing pieces of Gizmodo's acquisition of the iPhone 4 was actual definitive proof that it was indeed authentic.
We need some sort of confirmation from Apple that this is in fact your phone. I'm not just going to give it back.
Equally as good business chess on Brian Lamb's part.
While I'm sure it was an easy ask for Lamb, considering his position here, Steve Jobs was not a man accustomed to doing anything at the behest of others.
You're asking me to shoot my toes off.
Steve's fear was that if he or Apple formally claimed the device, sales of the current iPhone 3GS would suffer dramatically. Let's be real, Steve was stuck between a rock and a hard place. His choices were limited. He ended their very tense phone call by saying he had to talk to some people. The pair's next call started off very friendly.
Hey Brian, it's your new best favorite person in the world.
But then, a harsh turn into the man at the top of Apple.
So what's it gonna be?
The ultimatum comes out. Brian Lamb wants a letter from Apple claiming the device. And he's willing to go the distance.
This is some serious shit. If I have to serve you legal papers and go through the trouble of it, I'm coming for something, and it's gonna mean someone in your organization will go to jail.
Lamb tells us that the call became uglier and dicier, and I believe him. This was Steve Jobs. Lamb had to stand up in that moment and face Jobs directly. He told Steve he was willing to go to jail for this story. Their next phone call would be the last time that Steve Jobs and Brian Lamb would speak. Jobs believed him that Lamb was not going to budge. Steve told him coldly that Apple would send a note claiming the device. And the last thing that Brian Lamb said to Steve Jobs was,
Steve, I just wanted to say that I like my job, and it's exciting sometimes, but sometimes we have to do things that are difficult and what some might consider parasitic with regards to reporting on health and things like this.
You're just doing your job.
Brian got what he wanted. He received an email from Apple's Bruce Sewell, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, formally asking for the prototype back. It has come to our attention that Gizmodo is currently in possession of a device that belongs to Apple. This letter constitutes a formal request that you return the device to Apple. Please let me know where to pick up the unit. And they did. Apple picked up the prototype, with everyone involved playing nice. Or so we thought. This was all the proof that Gizmodo needed that the prototype they bought was indeed the future iPhone 4. And this was all the proof that Steve Jobs and Apple needed that it was time to get serious. The news cycle churns forward. The story of Apple's elite veil of secrecy being defeated by a few beers and a lapse in responsibility spreads across the world. And more importantly, spreads to legacy media.
Gadget aficionados are thrilled tonight. Apple is well known for fiercely guarding technology, but it seems that an Apple employee accidentally left a prototype of the new iPhone at a bar in California last month, and now it's all over the web.
Have you guys heard the joke about the Apple employee who walks into a bar?
Apple's secret iPhone revealed and returned.
Everyone was getting contacted by television news outlets constantly. Jason Chen, Gray Powell and his family, even Brian Hogan, who tells us that he had news trucks parked outside his family home for almost 3 weeks after his own name became public knowledge. This is no longer a niche tech story written about on a few blogs. This is now major news, with more eyes being on Apple and the people involved than any other leak story, and what Steve Jobs thought could be handled with a few strongly worded phone calls was about to pick up an entirely different kind of attention. California's Silicon Valley was never just a fancy name. The region's affinity for technology, computers, and everything with a semiconductor has been present since the 1950s. But it was only in 1997 that the California Department of Justice realized this evolving industry would require a special touch. The Regional Enforcement Allied Computer Team was created. This special multi-jurisdictional law enforcement task force's mission was to take the lead in high technology crimes, specifically targeting those in Silicon Valley. React, to this day, handles everything from white-collar crime to network intrusion, software piracy, and more. But most importantly, theft of trade secrets. And like most other giants of Silicon Valley at the time, Apple had a place at the tippy top of React's board of directors. The morning after Gizmodo's story goes live, 2 high-level Apple executives, accompanied by lawyer George Riley, meet with investigators from React. According to the task force's own Detective Matthew Broad, Riley, the lawyer present, apparently told the task force that all of Gizmodo's actions were, quote, immensely damaging to Apple, and due to the nature of the leaks, Apple was concerned the sales of the currently available iPhone 3GS would tank. During the meeting, Riley couldn't estimate a dollar figure, but said losses were, quote, huge, according to the court papers made public after the fact. And even though Apple says they didn't directly utilize the React task force, the following events make it seem like the opposite is true. Katie Cotton, who was Apple's public relations chief at the time, told CNET, "We reported what we believe is a crime, and the district attorney from San Mateo County is taking it from there." Brian Hogan and his roommates are collectively panicking, because who wouldn't? One of the world's largest, most powerful companies is looking for something you shouldn't have in your possession, and you sold it! It gets worse, because not all of Hogan's friends were on his side.
For at least for me and anyone watching this who are into technology, this is our perfect storm of a true crime story.
One of his roommates, Catherine, remember her, had actually been in contact with the police behind Hogan's back almost the entire time. Turns out my roommate was talking to the cops the whole time, giving them everything they wanted to try and collect a reward. She took pictures of my things, wrote down conversations, and flat out lied about certain stuff so the cops could get the most damning case possible. She told them when I caught wind of what she was doing, and they came to talk. I went to my parents' house, and she told them where that was, too. Catherine's concerns, per the unsealed affidavit, were that since Hogan connected the prototype to her computer, Apple could eventually trace the device back to her IP address. And she didn't want to be complicit in the sale of Apple's stolen property, especially after she tried to convince Hogan not to sell the device because it would ruin Gray Powell's career. Hogan said, "Sucks for him, he lost his phone. Shouldn't have lost his phone." The affidavit goes on to detail that Hogan and another one of his roommates, Thomas Warner, allegedly tried to hide all evidence that could connect them to the prototype. That's when Catherine places an urgent call to Detective Broad. Hogan's attorney, Jeffrey Bornstein, denied the hiding of evidence heavily. However, Hogan's and Warner's actions speak to the opposite. Detective Broad tracked him down successfully to his father's house, with the help of Catherine, where Hogan told him that his computer had been discarded at local Sequoia Christian Church. Hogan's attorney would later claim that he was in the process of moving, with Thomas Warner being the one in possession of the computer that ended up at the church. And as Warner, who had his own previous run-in with police amounting to 2 outstanding warrants for misdemeanors, arrived at Hogan's father's house at about 1 a.m., he was arrested. React investigators would later find one of the stickers that marked the iPhone 4 as a prototype at a local gas station, along with a 512 megabyte thumb drive and a 1 gigabyte compact flash card under a bush in the area. And of course, the computer left at the church. Hogan and his roommates would not be the only ones getting a visit from law enforcement. Jason Chen and his wife were coming home after dinner, and, well, they had some guests. My wife and I drove to dinner and got back at around 9:45 p.m., reports Chen in an article published on Gizmodo 3 days after, titled "Police Seize Jason Chen's Computers." The giveaway was the garage door. Chen noticed it was half open, and when he went to close it, police officers met him with a stern hand. They said they had a warrant to search my house and any vehicles on the property in my control. They then made me place my hands behind my head and searched me to make sure I had no weapons or sharp objects on me. As I'm sure any of us would have been, Jason Chen was under a tremendous amount of stress. Police were tearing his home apart, had been for hours apparently, loading up absolutely anything and everything, even remotely resembling a computer, a camera, or a storage device into a truck, and cataloging all of it as evidence. Oh yeah. And they broke his front door down. The officers printed out the inventory list and told me that they took photos of before and after so that they were sure they didn't do any damage. Other than the things they took, it doesn't seem like they did any damage other than the front door when they bashed it in. This was a major turning point in the iPhone 4 story, and really the entire discussion around checkbook journalism in the tech space. And most importantly, when it comes to Apple and Steve Jobs, have they gone entirely too far?
I think there's a really effective way to handle conflict, which is just to be straight up, and it definitely feels personal that even after the device was retrieved, they were going back to people's homes to look for clues or auxiliary evidence to build a case. I think there's an effective way to do that, and there's a personal way to do that, and I think we know which one they took.
If you look at him as a CEO that had so much of his heart and so much of what he did into these products, he's not just some managerial guy. He is on the ground floor designing this stuff. It makes sense that he would feel personally hurt or offended by this happening.
I think it really does show how personally involved Steve was with pretty much every single level of Apple.
There's an argument to be made that the amount of police presence surrounding the iPhone 4 prototype, Jason Chen, Brian Hogan and company, is directly related to Steve's lack of respect for the work of sites like Gizmodo at the time. When you look back at clips of Steve talking about the iPhone 4 incident, his stance is clear. In the eyes of Steve Jobs, bloggers are not journalists. This missing prototype may have been leaked out, potentially to media.
It seems outrageous to put someone through that amount of mental anguish over an electronic device. You know, at the end of the day, it's a phone. So the idea that it could be handled with such an extreme amount of pressure and consequence that you could drive somebody to take their own life, that is just, it's heartbreaking and it's unjustified. Wow. Yeah, I've never heard that before. That is truly unbelievable. Wow. Gosh.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, that's just insane.
Only a brief statement was issued by Apple's But I won't be bullied tomorrow, won't have to be the scapegoat. I feel much better. At
Wow. Good morning.
I wish I found some better sounds no one's ever heard. I wish I had a better voice that sang some better words. I wish I found some chords in an order that is new. I wish I didn't have to rhyme every time I sang. I was told when I get older all my fears would shrink, but now I'm insecure and I care what people think. My name's blurry.